Chapter 3, Quey. Quey had received a message from his old friend Cujo and didn't know how he would answer it. That night, he pretended the heat was keeping him awake, an easy lie, for he was drenched in sweat. But then, when wasn't he sweating? It was so hot and humid in the bush that he felt like he was being slowly roasted for supper. He missed the castle, the breeze from the beach. Here, in the village of his mother, Effia, sweat pooled in his ears, in his belly button. His skin itched, and he imagined mosquitoes crawling up his feet to his legs, to his stomach, to rest at the watering hole of his navel. Did mosquitoes drink sweat? Or was it only blood? Blood. He pictured the prisoners being brought into the cellars by the 10s and 20s, their hands and feet bound and bleeding. He wasn't made for this. He was supposed to have an easier life, away from the workings of slavery. He was raised among the whites in Cape Coast, educated in England. He should still be in his office in the castle, working as a writer, the junior officer rank that his father, James Collins, had secured for him before his death, logging numbers that he could pretend didn't represent people bought and sold. Instead, the castle's new governor had summoned him, sent him here to the bush. As you know by now, Quey, we've had a long-standing working relationship with Abiku Badu and the other Negroes of his village. But of late, we've heard that they have begun trading with a few private companies. We would like to set up an outpost in the village that would act as a residence for a few of our employees, as a way of, say, gently, reminding our friends there that they have certain trade obligations to our company. You've been specially requested for the position, and given your parents' history with the village, and given your comfort and familiarity with the language and local customs, we thought that you might be a particular asset to our company while there. Quey had nodded and accepted the position, because what else could he do? But inside, he resisted. His comfort and familiarity with the local customs, his parents' history with the village. Quey was still in Effia's womb the last time he or his mother had been there. So scared was she of Baba. That was in 1779. Nearly 20 years ago. Baba had died in those years, and yet still they had stayed away. Quey felt his new job was a kind of punishment, and hadn't he been punished enough? The sun finally came up, and Quey went to see his uncle Fifi. When they'd met for the first time only a month before, Quey could hardly believe that a man like Fifi was related to him. It wasn't that he was handsome. Effia had been called the beauty her whole life, and so Quey was accustomed to beauty. It was that Fifi looked powerful, his body a graceful alliance of muscles. Quey had taken after his father, skinny and tall, but not particularly strong. James was powerful, but his power had come from his pedigree, the Collinses of Liverpool, who'd gained their wealth building slave ships. His mother's power came from her beauty, but Fifi's power came from his body, from the fact that he looked like he could take anything he wanted. Quey had known only one other person like that. "Ah, my son, you are welcome here," Fifi said when he saw Quey approaching. "Sit, eat." Summoned, the house girl came out with 2 bowls. She started to set one bowl in front of Fifi, but he stopped her with only a glance. "You must serve my son first." "Sorry," she mumbled, setting the bowl in front of Quey instead. Quey thanked her and looked down at the porridge. "Uncle, we've been here a month already, and yet still you haven't discussed our trade agreements. The company has the money to buy more, much more, but you have to let us. You have to stop trading with any other company." Quey had given this very speech or one like it many times before, but his uncle Fifi always ignored him. The first night they were there, Quey had wanted to talk to Badu about the trade agreement straight away. He thought the sooner he could get the chief to agree, the sooner he could leave. That night, Badu had invited all the men to drink at his compound. He brought them enough wine and Akpetishi to drown in. Timothy Hightower, an officer eager to impress the chief, drank half a caskful of the home brew before he passed out underneath a palm tree, shaking and vomiting and claiming to see spirits. Soon the rest of the men also littered the forest of Badu's front yard, vomiting or sleeping or searching for a local woman to sleep with. Quey waited for his chance to speak to Badu, sipping his drink all the while. He had had only 2 cups of wine before Fifi approached him. "Careful, Quey," Fifi said, pointing at the scene of men before them. "Stronger men than these have been brought down by too much drink." Quey looked at the cup in Fifi's hand, his eyebrow raised. "Water," Fifi said. "One of us must be ready for anything." He motioned to Badu, who had fallen asleep in his gold throne. His chin nestled down into the round flesh of his belly. Quey laughed, and Fifi cracked a smile, the first that Quey had seen since meeting him. Quey never talked to Badu that night, but as the weeks went on, he learned that it was not Badu he needed to please. While Abiku Badu was the figurehead, the Oman Hin, who received gifts from the political leaders of London and Holland alike for his role in their trade, Fifi was the authority. When he shook his head, the whole village stopped. Now Fifi was as silent as he was every other time Quey had brought up trade with the British. He looked out into the forest in front of them, and Quey followed his gaze. In the trees, 2 vibrant birds sang loudly, a discordant song. "Uncle, the agreement Badu made with my father, do you hear that?" Fifi asked, pointing to the birds. Frustrated, Quey nodded. When one bird stops, the other one starts. Each time their song gets louder, shriller. "Why do you think that is?" "Uncle, trade is the only reason we're here. If you want the British out of your village, you have to—" What you cannot hear, Quey, is the 3rd bird. She is quiet, quiet, listening to the male birds get louder and louder and louder still. And when they have sung their voices out, then and only then will she speak up. Then and only then will she choose the man whose song she liked better. For now she sits and lets them argue. Who will be the better partner? Who will give her a better seed? Who will fight for her when times are difficult? Quey, this village must conduct its business like that female bird. You want to pay more for slaves, pay more, but know that the Dutch will also pay more, and the Portuguese, and even the pirates will pay more too. And while you are all shouting about how much better you are than the others, I will be sitting quietly in my compound eating my fufu and waiting for the price I think is right. Now, let us not speak of business any more." Quey sighed. So he would be here forever. The birds had stopped singing. Perhaps they sensed his exasperation. He looked at them, their blue, yellow, orange wings, their hooked beaks. "There were no birds like this in London," Quey said softly. "There was no color. Everything was gray. The sky, the buildings, even the people looked gray." Fifi shook his head. "I don't know why Effia let James send you to that nonsense country." Quey nodded absently and returned to the porridge in his bowl. Quey had been a lonely child. When he was born, his father built a hut close to the castle so that he, Effia, and Quey could live more comfortably. In those days, trade had been prosperous. Quey never saw the dungeons, and he had only the faintest idea of what went on in the lower levels of the castle. But he knew that business was good because he rarely saw his father. Every day was for him and Effia. She was the most patient mother in all of Cape Coast, in all of the Gold Coast. She spoke softly yet assuredly. She never hit him, even when the other mothers taunted her, telling her that she would spoil him and that he would never learn. "Learn what?" Effia would answer. "What did I ever learn from Baba?" And yet, Quey did learn. He sat in Effia's lap as she taught him to speak, repeating a word in both Fante and English, until Quey could hear in one language and answer in the other. She had only learned how to read and write herself in the first year of Quey's life, and yet she taught him with vigor, holding his small, fat fist in hers, as they traced lines and lines and lines together, "How smart you are," she exclaimed, when Quey learned to spell his name without her help. In 1784, on Quey's 5th birthday, Effia first told him about her own childhood in Badu's village. He learned all of the names: Kobe, Baba, Fifi. He learned there was another mother whose name they would never know, that the shimmering black stone Effia always wore about her neck had belonged to this woman, his true grandmother. Telling this story, Effia's face darkened, but the storm passed when Quey reached up and touched her cheek. "You are my own child," she said. "Mine." And she was his. When he was young, that had been enough, but as he grew older, he began to lament the fact that his family was so small. Unlike all of the other families in the Gold Coast, where siblings piled on top of siblings in the steady stream of marriages each powerful man consummated, he wished that he could meet his father's other children, those white Collinses who lived across the Atlantic, but he knew that it would never be. Quey had only himself, his books, the beach, the castle, his mother. "I'm worried because he has no friends," Effia said to James one day. "He doesn't play with the other castle children." Quey had almost stepped in the door after a day of building sandcastle replicas of the Cape Coast castle, when he heard Effia mention his name, so he had remained outside to listen. "What are we supposed to do about that? You've coddled him, Effia. He's got to learn to do some things on his own. He should be playing with other Fante children, village children, so that he can get away from here from time to time. Don't you know anyone?" "I'm home," Quey announced, perhaps a bit too noisily, not wanting to hear what his father would say next. By the end of the day, he'd forgotten all about it. But weeks later, when Kujo Saki came with his father to visit the castle, Quey remembered his parents' conversation. Kujo's father was the chief of a prominent Fante village. He was Abiku Badu's biggest competitor, and he had begun meeting with James Collins to discuss increasing trade when the governor asked him if he might bring his eldest son to one of their meetings. "Quey, this is Kujo," James said, giving Quey a small push toward the boy. "You two play while we talk." Quey and Kujo watched their fathers walk off to a different side of the castle. Once they could hardly make them out anymore, Kujo turned his attention to Quey. "Are you white?" Kujo had asked him, touching his hair. Quey recoiled at Kujo's touch, though many others had done the same thing, asked him the same question. "I'm not white," he said softly. "What? Speak up," Kujo said, and so Quey had repeated himself, nearly shouting. From the distance, the boy's fathers turned to observe the commotion. "Not so loud, Quey," James said. Quey could feel color flood into his cheeks, but Kujo had just looked on, clearly amused. "So you're not white. What are you?" "I'm like you," Quey said. Kujo held his hand out and demanded that Quey do the same, until they were standing arm to arm, skin touching skin. "Not like me," Kujo said. Quey had wanted to cry, but that desire embarrassed him. He knew that he was one of the half-caste children of the castle, and like the other half-caste children, he could not fully claim either half of himself, neither his father's whiteness nor his mother's blackness, neither England nor the Gold Coast. Kujo must have seen the tears fighting to escape Quey's eyes. "Come now," he said, grabbing Quey's hand. "My father says they keep big guns here. Show me where." Though he'd asked Quey to show him, Kujo was the one who began to lead the way, running until the two boys had zipped past their fathers, toward the cannons. It was in this way that Quey and Kujo became friends. 2 weeks after the day they first met, Quey had received a message from Kujo asking if he would like to visit his village. "Can I go?" Quey asked his mother, but Effia was already pushing him out the door, overjoyed at the prospect of a friend. Kujo's was the first village that Quey had ever spent a lot of time in, and he was amazed at how different it was from the castle and from Cape Coast. There was not even one white person there, no soldiers to say what one could or could not do. Though the children were no strangers to beatings, they were still rowdy, loud, and free. Kujo, who was 11 like Quey, was already the oldest of 10 children, and he ordered his siblings about as though they were his tiny army. Go and fetch my friend something to eat, he shouted at his youngest sister when he saw Quey approaching. The girl was but a toddler, thumb still inseparable from mouth, but she always did as Cujo said as soon as he said it. Hey Quey, look what I found, Cujo said, hardly waiting for Quey to reach him before opening his palm. 2 small snails were in his hands, their tiny, slimy bodies wriggling between Cujo's fingers. This one is yours and this one is mine, Cujo said, pointing them out. Let's race them. Cujo closed his palm again and started to run. He was faster, and Quey had a hard time keeping up. When they got to a clearing in the forest, Cujo got down on his stomach and motioned for Quey to do the same. He gave Quey his snail, then marked a line in the dirt as the starting point. The 2 boys put their snails behind the line, then released them. At first, neither snail moved. Are they stupid? Cujo asked, prodding his snail with his index finger. You're free, stupid snails. Go, go. Maybe they're just shocked, Quey said, and Cujo looked at him like he was the one who was stupid. But then, Quey's snail started to move past the line, followed seconds later by Cujo's snail. Quey's snail didn't move like a snail usually did, slowly and deliberately. It was as though he knew he was racing, as though he knew he was free. It didn't take long for the boys to lose sight of him, while Cujo's snail ambled along, even turning in a circle several times. Suddenly Quey was nervous. Maybe Cujo would be angry at his loss and tell him to leave the village and never come back. Quey had only just met Cujo, but already he knew that he didn't want to lose him. He did the only thing he could think to do. He'd stuck out his hand, as he'd often seen his father do after business deals, and to his surprise, Cujo took it. The boys shook. My snail was very stupid, but yours did well, Cujo said. Yes, mine did very well, Quey agreed, relieved. We should name them. We'll call mine Richard because it's a British name and he was bad like the British are bad. Yours can be named Kwame. Quey laughed. Yes, Richard is bad like the British, he said. He forgot in that second that his own father was British, and when he remembered later, he realized that he didn't care. He felt only that he belonged, fully and completely. The boys grew older. Quey grew 4 inches in one summer, while Cujo grew muscle. His legs and arms rippled so that sweat flowing down them looked like cresting waves. He became known far and wide for his wrestling prowess. Older boys from neighboring villages were brought to challenge him, and still he won every match. Hey, Quey, when will you wrestle me? Cujo asked. Quey had never challenged him. He was nervous. Not of losing, for he knew he would lose. But because he'd spent the last 3 years carefully watching and knew better than anyone what Cujo's body was capable of. The elegance of Cujo's movements as he circled around his opponents, the mathematics of the violence, how an arm plus a neck could equal breathlessness, or an elbow plus a nose meant blood. Cujo never missed a step in this dance, and his body, both forceful and controlled, awed Quey. Lately, Quey had been thinking about Cujo's strong arms encircling him, dragging him down to the ground, Cujo's body on top of his. Get Richard to wrestle you, Quey said, and Cujo let out his exuberant laugh. After the snail race, the boys had started to name everything, good or bad, Richard. When they got in trouble with their mothers for saying something crude, they blamed Richard. When they ran the fastest or won a wrestling match, it was thanks to Richard. Richard was there the day Cujo had swum too far out and his strokes had started to fail him. It was Richard who wanted him to drown, and Richard who had saved him, helping him to regain his rhythm. Poor Richard, I would destroy him. Oh, Cujo said, flexing his muscles. Quey reached over to squeeze Cujo's arm. Though the muscle did not give way, he said, Why? Because of this small thing? Eh? Cujo said. I said this arm is small. It feels soft in my hand, brother. Without warning, quick as a stroke of heat lightning, Cujo locked Quey's neck into his arms. Soft? He asked. His voice was hardly more than a whisper, a wind in Quey's ear. Careful, friend. There is nothing soft here. Though Quey was losing his breath, he could feel his cheeks flushing. Cujo's body was pressed so close to him that he felt for a moment that they were one body. Each hair on Quey's arm stood at attention, waiting for what would happen next. Finally, Cujo let him go. Quey took in deep gulps of air as Cujo looked on, a smile playing on his lips. "Were you scared, Quey?" Cujo asked. "No." "No? Don't you know every man in Fante land is scared of me now?" "You wouldn't hurt me," Quey said. He looked straight into Cujo's eyes and could feel something in them falter. Quickly, Cujo regained his composure. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Quey said. "Challenge me then. Challenge me to wrestle." "I won't." Cujo walked up to Quey until he was standing only inches from his face. "Challenge me," he said, and his breath danced on Quey's own lips. The next week, Cujo had an important match. While drunk, a soldier in the castle had boasted that Cujo would never be able to beat him. Negroes fighting other Negroes is not a challenge. Put a savage against a white man, then you'll see. One of the servants, a man from Cujo's own village, had heard the white soldier's boast and reported it back to Cujo's father. The next day, the chief arrived to deliver his message personally. "Any white man who thinks he can beat my son, let him try. In 3 days' time, we will see who is better." Quey's father had tried to forbid the match, saying that it was uncivilized, but the soldiers were bored and restless. Uncivilized fun was exactly what they craved. Cujo came at the end of that week. He brought with him his father and his 7 brothers, no one else. Quey had not spoken to him since the week before, and he found himself inexplicably nervous, the feeling of Cujo's breath still present on his lips. The soldier who had made the boast was also nervous. He paced and his hand shook as all the men at the castle looked on. Cujo stood across from his challenger. He looked him up and down, assessing him. Then his eyes found Quey's in the audience. Quey nodded at him and Cujo smiled. A smile that Quey knew to mean, "I will win this." And he did. Only a minute after the match started, Cujo had his arms wrapped around the soldier's fat belly, flipping him over and pinning him down. The crowd roared with excitement. More challengers stepped in, soldiers whom Cujo defeated with varying degrees of ease until finally all the men were drunk and spent, and Cujo alone was unruffled. The soldiers started to leave. After congratulating Cujo loudly and raucously, his own brothers and father also left. Cujo was to spend the night in Cape Coast with Quey. "I'll wrestle you," Quey said, when it looked like everyone had gone. The night air was starting to move into the castle, cooling it, but only a bit. "Now that I'm too tired to win?" Cujo asked. "You've never been too tired to win." "Okay. You want to wrestle me? Come catch me first." And with that, Cujo broke into a run. Quey was faster than he was in the early years of their friendship. He caught up to Cujo at the cannons and dove toward him, locking his legs and pulling him down to the ground. Within seconds, Cujo was on top of him, panting heavily, while Quey struggled to turn him over. Quey knew he should tap the ground 3 times, the signal to end the match, but he didn't want to. He didn't want to. He didn't want Cujo to get up. He didn't want to miss the weight of him. Slowly, Quey relaxed his body, and he felt Cujo do the same. The boys drank in each other's gazes. Their breathing slowed. The feeling on Quey's lips grew stronger, a tingling that threatened to draw his face up toward Cujo's. "Get up right now," James said. Quey didn't know how long his father had been standing there watching them, but he recognized a new tone in his father's voice. It was the same measured control he used when he spoke to servants, and Quey knew, though he'd never seen, to slaves before he struck them. But now there was fear mixed in. "Go home, Cujo," James said. Quey watched his friend leave. Cujo didn't even look back. The next month, just before Quey's 14th birthday, while Effia cried and fought some more, going so far once as to strike James across the face, Quey boarded a ship bound for England. "I heard you're back from London. Can I see you, old friend?" Quey couldn't stop thinking about the message he'd received from Cujo. He stared into his bowl and saw that he'd hardly eaten any of the porridge. Fifi had already finished one bowl and asked for another. "Maybe I should have stayed in London," Quey said. His uncle looked up from his meal and gave him a funny look. Stayed in London for what? It was safer there, Quey said softly. Safer? Why? Because the British don't tramp through bushland finding slaves? Because they keep their hands clean while we work? Let me tell you, the work they do is the most dangerous of all. Quey nodded, though it wasn't what he'd meant. In England, he'd gotten to see the way black people lived in white countries. Indians and Africans, who were packed 20 or more to a room, who ate the slop the pigs left behind, who coughed and coughed and coughed endlessly, all together, a symphony of sickness. He knew the dangers that waited across the Atlantic, but he knew, too, the danger in himself. Don't be weak, Quey, Fifi said, staring at him intently. And for just a second, Quey wondered if his uncle had understood him after all. But then Fifi returned to his porridge and said, Isn't there work for you to do? Quey shook his head, trying to collect himself. He smiled at his uncle and thanked him for the meal, and then he set off. The work wasn't difficult. Quey and his fellow companymen's official duties included meeting Badu and his men weekly to go over the inventory, overseeing the bomb boys who loaded the canoes with cargo, and updating the castle's governor with news of Badu's other trade partners. Today, it was Quey's turn to oversee the bomb boys. He walked the several miles to the edge of the village and greeted the young Fante boys who worked for the British, shuttling slaves from the coastal villages to the castle. On this day, there were only 5 slaves, bound and waiting. The youngest, a small girl, had messed herself, but everyone ignored it. Quey had grown accustomed to the smell of shit, but fear was one smell that would stand out forever. It curled his nose and brought tears to his eyes, but he had learned long ago how to keep himself from crying. Every time he saw the bomb boys set off with a canoe full of slaves, he thought of his father standing on the shores of the Cape Coast castle, ready to receive them. On this shore, watching the canoe push off, Quey brimmed with the same shame that accompanied each slave departure. What had his father felt on his shore? James had died soon after Quey arrived in London. The ship ride there had been uncomfortable at best, harrowing at worst, with Quey alternating steadily between crying and vomiting. On the ship, all Quey could think about was how this was what his father did to the slaves. This was what his father did to his problems, put them on a boat, shipped them away. How had James felt every time he watched a ship push off? Was it the same mix of fear and shame and loathing that Quey felt for his own flesh, his mutinous desire? Back in the village, Badu was already drunk. Quey said hello and then tried to move quickly past him. He wasn't fast enough. Badu grabbed him by the shoulder and asked, "How's your mother? Tell her to come and see me, eh?" Quey pursed his lips into what he hoped looked like a smile. He tried to swallow his disgust. When he'd accepted his assignment here, Effia had cried out, begging him to refuse, begging him to run away, all the way into a shanty, as his never-known grandmother before him had done, if that was what he needed to do in order to escape the obligation. She'd fingered the stone pendant on her neck as she spoke to him. "There is evil in that village, Quey. Baba is long dead," Quey said, "and you and I are both too old to still believe in ghosts." His mother had spit on the ground at his feet and shook her head so quickly he thought it might spin off. "You think you know, but you don't know," she said. "Evil is like a shadow. It follows you." "Perhaps my mother will come visit soon," Quey said now, knowing that she would never want to see Badu. Though his parents had fought, mostly about him, it was obvious to all that they had cared for each other, and though a part of Quey hated his father, another part still wanted ardently to please him. Quey finally freed himself from Badu and kept on walking. Cujo's message repeated in his head. "I heard you're back from London. Can I see you, old friend?" When Quey had returned from London, he'd been too nervous to ask after Cujo, but he hadn't needed to. Cujo had taken over as chief of his old village, and they still traded with the British. Quey had recorded Cujo's name in the castle ledgers nearly every day when he was still working as a writer. It would be easy enough now to go see Cujo, to talk as they used to tell him that he hated London as he had hated his father, that everything about the place, the cold, the damp, the dark, had felt like a personal slight against him, designed for the sole purpose of keeping him away from Cujo. But what good could come of seeing him? Would one look have him back where he'd been 6 years ago, back on that castle floor? Maybe London had done what his father had hoped it would do, but then again, maybe it hadn't. Weeks went steadily on, and still Quey sent no answer to Cujo. Instead, he devoted himself to his work. Fifi and Badu had numerous contacts in Ashanti-land and further north. Big men, warriors, chiefs, and the like who would bring in slaves each day by the 10s and 20s. Trade had increased so much, and the methods of gathering slaves had become so reckless that many of the tribes had taken to marking their children's faces so that they would be distinguishable. Northerners, who were most frequently captured, could have upwards of 20 scars on their faces, making them too ugly to sell. Most of the slaves brought to Quey's village outposts were those people captured in tribal wars. A few were sold by their families, and the rarest kind of slave was the one that Fifi captured himself in his dark night missions up north. Fifi was preparing himself for one such journey. He wouldn't tell Quey what the mission was, but Quey knew it had to be something particularly treacherous, for his uncle had sought help from another Fante village. "You can keep all the captives but one," Fifi was saying to someone. "Take them back with you when we split up in Dunquois." Quey had just been summoned to his compound. Before him, warriors were dressing for battle, muskets, machetes, and spears in hand. Quey moved further in, trying to see the man his uncle spoke to. "Ah, Quey, you finally come to greet me, eh?" The voice was deeper than Quey remembered, and yet he knew it immediately. His hand trembled as he held it out to shake with his old friend. Cujo's grip was firm, his hand soft. The handshake took Quey back to Cujo's village, to the snail race, to Richard. "What are you doing here?" Quey asked. He hoped his voice didn't betray him. He hoped he sounded calm and sure. "Your uncle has promised us a good mission today. I was eager to accept." Fifi clapped Cujo's shoulder and moved on to speak to the warriors. "You never returned my message," Cujo said softly. "I didn't have time." "I see," Cujo said. He looked the same, taller, broader, but the same. "Your uncle tells me you haven't yet married." "No. I married last spring. A chief must be married." "Oh, right," Quey said in English, forgetting himself. Cujo laughed. He took up his machete and leaned in closer to Quey. "You speak English like a British man, just like Richard, eh? When I have finished up north with your uncle, I will return to my own village. You are always welcome there. Come and see me." Fifi gave one last cry to gather the men, and Cujo went running. As he sped off, Cujo glanced back and smiled at Quey. Quey didn't know how long they would be gone, but he knew he would not sleep until his uncle returned. No one had told him anything about the mission. Indeed, Quey had seen the warriors go out a handful of times and never questioned it. But now his heart thumped so hard it felt like a toad had replaced his throat. He could taste every beat. Why had Fifi told Cujo that Quey wasn't married? Had Cujo asked? How could Quey be welcomed in Cujo's village? Would he live in the chief's compound? In his own hut like a third wife? Or would he be in a hut on the edge of the village alone? The toad croaked. There was a way. There was no way. There was a way. Quey's mind raced back and forth with every thump. 1 week passed, then 2, then 3. On the first day of the 4th week, Quey was finally summoned to the slave cellar. Fifi was lying against the wall of the cellar, his hand covering his flank as it oozed blood from a large gash. Soon one of the company doctors arrived with a thick needle and thread and began sewing Fifi up. "What happened?" Quey asked. Fifi's men were guarding the cellar door, clearly shaken. They held both machetes and muskets, and when so much as a leaf rustled in the woods, they would clutch each weapon tighter. Fifi began laughing, a sound like the last roar of a dying animal. The doctor finished closing up the wound and poured a brown liquid over it, causing Fifi to stop laughing and cry out. "Quiet," one of Fifi's soldiers said. "We don't know who may have followed us." Quey knelt down to meet his uncle's eyes. What happened? Fifi was gnashing his teeth against the slow-moving wind. He lifted an arm and pointed to the cellar door. "Look what we have brought, my son," he said. Quey stood up and went to the door. Fifi's men handed him a lamp and then moved aside so that he could enter. When he did, the darkness echoed around him, reverberating against him as though he had stepped inside a hollow drum. He lifted the lamp higher and saw the slaves. He didn't expect to see many, for the next shipment was not set to arrive until early the following week. He knew immediately that these were not slaves the Ashantis brought in. These were people Fifi had stolen. There were 2 men tied together in the corner, big warriors, bleeding from minor flesh wounds. When they saw Quey, they began to jeer and twee, thrashing against their chains so that they broke fresh flesh, bleeding anew. On the opposite wall sat a young girl who made no noise. She looked up at Quey with large moon eyes, and he knelt down beside her to study her face. On her cheek was a large oval-shaped scar, a medical mark James had taught Quey years before he'd shipped him off to England, a mark of the Ashantis. Quey got up, looking at the girl still. Slowly he backed away, realizing who the girl must be. Outside, his uncle had passed out from the pain, and the soldiers had loosened their grips on their weapons, content that no one had followed them. Quey looked at the one closest to the door, grabbed his shoulder, shook him. "What in God's name are you doing with the Ashanti king's daughter?" The soldier lowered his eyes, shook his head, and did not speak. Whatever Fifi had planned, it could not fail, or the entire village would pay with their lives. Every night after that night, Quey sat with Fifi as he healed. He heard the story of the capture, how Fifi and his men had stolen into Ashanti in the dead of night, informed by one of their contacts as to when the girl would have the fewest guards around her, how Fifi had been slit around like a coconut by the tip of her guard's machete when he reached for her, how they had dragged their captives south, through the forest until they reached the coast. Her name was Nana Ya, and she was the eldest daughter of Osei Bonsu, the highest power in the Ashanti kingdom, a man who commanded respect from the Queen of England herself for his sway over the Gold Coast's role in the slave trade. Nana Ya was an important political bargaining tool, and people had been trying to capture her since her infancy. Wars had been started over her, to get her, to free her, to marry her. Quey was so worried he didn't ask how Cudjo had fared. Soon Quey knew Fifi's informant would be caught and tortured until he told who had taken her. It was only a matter of time until the consequences came to meet them. "Uncle, the Ashantis will not forgive this. They will—" Fifi cut him off. Since the night of the capture, every time Quey tried to broach the topic of the girl, to gauge Fifi's intentions, the man clutched his side and grew quiet, or told one of his long-winded fables. "The Ashantis have been angry with us for years," Fifi said. "Ever since the time they found out we traded other Ashantis, brought to us by some northerners Badu found. Badu told me then that we trade with the ones who pay more. It is the same thing I told the Ashantis when they found out, the same thing I told you. Ashanti anger is to be expected, Quey, and you are right that it is not to be underestimated. But trust me, they are wise where we are cunning. They will forgive." Fifi stopped talking, and Quey watched as his uncle's youngest daughter, a girl of only 2, played in the yard. After a while, a house girl came by with a snack of ground nuts and bananas. She approached Fifi first, but he stopped her. With a level voice and leveled gaze, he said, "You must serve my son first." The woman did as she was told, bowing before Quey and reaching out with her right hand. After they had both received their fill, the girl left while Quey watched the measured sway of her ample hips. "Why do you always say that?" Quey asked once he was sure she had gone. "Why do I say what?" "That I'm your son." Quey looked down, spoke so softly that he hoped the ground would swallow his sound. "You never claimed me before." Fifi split the shell of a ground nut with his teeth, separating it from the nut itself and spitting it onto the ground before them. He looked toward the thin dirt road that led away from his compound and toward the village square. He looked as though he were expecting someone. You were in England too long, Quey. Maybe you have forgotten that here, mothers, sisters, and their sons are most important. If you are chief, your sister's son is your successor, because your sister was born of your mother, but your wife was not. Your sister's son is more important to you than even your own son. But Quey, your mother is not my sister. She is not the daughter of my mother, and when she married a white man from the castle, I began to lose her. And because my mother had always hated her, I began to hate her too. And this hate was good at first. It made me work harder. I would think about her and all of the white people in the castle, and I would say, my people here in this village, we will be stronger than the white men. We will be richer too. And when Badu became too greedy and too fat to fight, I began to fight for him. And even then I hated your mother and your father, and I hated my own mother, and I hated my own father too, for the kind of people I knew that they were. I suppose I even began to hate myself. The last time your mother came to this village, I was 15 years old. It was for my father's funeral, and after Effia had gone, Baba told me that because she was not truly my sister, I owed her nothing. And for many years I believed that, but I am an old man now, wiser, but weaker. In my youth, no man could have touched me with his machete, but now... Fifi's voice trailed off as he gestured to his wound. He cleared his throat and continued, soon, all that I have helped to build in this village will no longer belong to me. I have sons, but I have no sisters, and so all that I have helped to build will blow away like dust in a breeze. I am the one who told your governor to give you this job, Quey, because you are the person I am supposed to leave all of this to. I loved Effia as a sister once, so even though you are not of my mother, you are the closest thing to a firstborn nephew that I have. I will give you all that I have. I will make up for my mother's wrongdoings. Tomorrow night, you will marry Nana Ya, so that even if the Ashanti king and all of his men come knocking on my door, they cannot deny you. They cannot kill you or anyone in this village, because it is now your village, as it was once your mother's. I will make sure you become a very powerful man, so that even after the white men have all gone from this Gold Coast, and believe me, they will go, you will still matter long after the castle walls have crumbled. Fifi began to pack a pipe. He blew out of it until white smoke formed little roofs above the pipe's bowl. The rainy season was coming, and soon the air would start to thicken, and the people of the Gold Coast would have to relearn how to move in a climate that was always hot and wet, as though it intended to cook its inhabitants for dinner. This was how they lived there, in the bush. Eat or be eaten, capture or be captured, marry for protection. Quey would never go to Cujo's village. He would not be weak. He was in the business of slavery, and sacrifices had to be made.